Over 2,500 years ago, the most terrifying army on Earth conquered the known world. They burned cities to the ground, enslaved entire nations, and built mountains of skulls. But at the very height of their power, around the year 700 BC, this brutal empire did something that makes absolutely no sense. They stopped destroying and they started collecting. They built a massive building, filled it with 30,000 clay tablets, and created the very first royal library in human history. This is the story of the Assyrian Empire. And more importantly, this is the story of how their greatest weapon was not the sword, but a desperate race to gather all the knowledge in the world. To understand why this library was built, you first have to understand the people who built it. Around the year 700 BC, the Assyrian Empire was at its absolute peak. If you lived in the ancient Middle East during this time, the word Assyria meant terror. They controlled a massive stretch of land that went from Egypt all the way to Iran. No one could stop them. They had the most advanced military tactics, iron weapons, and a ruthless desire to rule over everyone else. The heart of this massive empire was a city called Nineveh. Today, its ruins sit in northern Iraq. But back then, Nineveh was a marvel. It was likely the largest city in the entire world. It had giant stone walls, huge gates guarded by massive stone bulls with human heads, and lush gardens that seemed to defy nature. But kings in the ancient world were usually judged by how many battles they won or how many monuments they built. They were not judged by how much they read. Kings hired scribes to read and write for them. For a king to know how to read ancient texts was very rare. Then came a king named Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was different. Yes, he was a ruthless warlord who crushed his enemies without mercy, but he was also a genius. He bragged that he could read the hardest ancient languages. He claimed he could solve complex math problems. He even said he could predict the future by reading the stars. He realized something that no other king had ever realized before. True power is not just controlling land. True power is controlling information. Ashurbanipal wanted to know everything. He wanted the magic spells of his enemies. He wanted the medical secrets of foreign doctors. He wanted the history of the kings who lived thousands of years before him. So, he gave an order that changed the course of human history. He commanded his men to build a grand library right inside his palace at Nineveh. But building the library was only the first step. To fill it, the king did something incredible. He sent his royal scholars out into the world. These men were like ancient spies. They traveled to temples and cities far beyond the capital. Their mission was simple but absolute. They were told to find every important text in existence. When they found a rare book, they did not just read it, they confiscated it. If a temple refused to give up their holy texts, the king's men took them by force. In other cases, they forced the greatest scholars of the ancient world to sit and make perfect word-for-word copies of ancient scrolls. Then, they brought all of these copies back to Nineveh. The sheer scale of what they collected is hard to wrap your mind around. We are talking about 30,000 individual texts. But these were not books made of paper. Paper did not exist yet in this part of the world. Instead, they wrote on soft clay. They used a small wooden stick shaped like a triangle to press tiny wedges into the wet clay. This type of writing is called cuneiform. Once the writing was done, they left the clay out in the hot desert sun to dry. It turned into a hard, solid brick. Imagine walking into the Library of Nineveh at the height of its glory. You would not see towering wooden bookshelves filled with paper. You would see endless rows of heavy clay tablets, and the library was incredibly organized. This is the first time in history we see deliberate, careful archiving of knowledge. Ashurbanipal did not just throw the tablets into a room. He had his workers sort them by subject. Medicine went into one section. Magic and religion went into another. Astronomy and math had their own places. They even invented a catalog system. A librarian could look at a list and find exactly where a specific tablet was located. Some tablets were so long that the story had to be continued onto a second or third piece of clay. To keep them in order, the ancient librarians wrote a small catchphrase at the bottom of the first tablet, which matched the very first line of the next tablet. It was the ancient version of page numbers. What exactly did these 30,000 tablets say? They held the total sum of human knowledge up to that point. There were medical texts that described how to perform surgeries and mix medicines. There were lists of every known plant and animal. There were detailed star charts that tracked the movement of the planets over hundreds of years. There were dictionaries that translated dead languages into the modern language of the time. But the most amazing things in the library were the stories. The library held the oldest myths and legends of human civilization. The most famous of all was the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is a story about a king searching for the secret to living forever. It is one of the oldest pieces of literature ever written. The library also held a story that shocked the modern world when it was finally translated. It was the story of a massive worldwide flood. A flood where a man was told by a god to build a giant boat and save the animals. This ancient clay tablet, written hundreds of years before the Bible was put into its final form, proved that the people of the ancient Middle East shared the same deep historical memories. King Ashurbanipal was very proud of his collection. He put a personal stamp on the bottom of the most important tablets. The stamp basically said, "I am the great king, and this belongs to me." He even put curses on the tablets. A warning was written on the clay, stating that if anyone stole the tablet or ruined the words, the gods would destroy their life and erase their name from the earth. For a few decades, the Library of Nineveh was the glowing center of human intelligence. But nothing lasts forever, especially not empires built on blood. The people that Assyria had tortured and conquered finally had enough. In the year 612 BC, a massive army of rebels, led by the Babylonians and the Medes, marched on the great city of Nineveh. The battle was brutal. The rebels broke through the giant stone walls. They flooded the streets. They killed the king and slaughtered the people. They wanted to erase the Assyrian Empire from the face of the earth. So they set the greatest city in the world on fire. The flames consumed the palaces. The huge wooden roofs collapsed. The Library of Nineveh was caught right in the middle of the inferno. The heat was so intense that it melted the gold and shattered the stone. The rebels thought they had destroyed everything. They thought they had wiped the memory of Assyria out of history. But by setting the massive library on fire, the attackers actually made a massive mistake. Remember, the books were not made of paper. They were made of dried mud. When the giant palace caught fire, the library acted like a giant superheated oven. The intense flames did not burn the clay tablets. Instead, the fire baked them. It turned the fragile, sun-dried clay into rock-hard pottery. When the burning roof finally caved in, thousands of tons of dirt and debris fell directly on top of the baked tablets, burying them deep underground. The city of Nineveh was never rebuilt. The dirt slowly covered the massive ruins. Grass grew over the dirt. Hundreds of years passed, then thousands of years passed. The greatest empire of the ancient world was totally forgotten. It became nothing more than a myth. For 2,500 years, the 30,000 tablets sat in the total darkness, perfectly preserved under a hill of dirt. Then, in the 1850s, everything changed. A British explorer named Austin Henry Layard was digging in the dusty hills of northern Iraq. He was looking for ancient ruins. He hired local workers to dig deep trenches into a strange, massive mound of dirt. One day, his workers hit something hard. It was not just a rock. It was a massive stone wall. They had accidentally found the lost palace of Nineveh. As they dug deeper into the dark, ruined rooms, they found a room with the floor covered in broken pieces of pottery. There were thousands of them, buried under the ash of the fire that destroyed the city in 612 BC. Layard had no idea what they were at first, but when he brushed the dirt away, he saw the tiny triangle-shaped writing. He had found the lost library. They packed the heavy clay tablets into wooden crates, put them on boats, and shipped them all the way to London, to the British Museum. For years, no one could even read them. The language had been dead for thousands of years. But slowly, brilliant scholars began to crack the code. They began to translate the tiny wedges. As they read the tablets, the ancient world suddenly woke up. The voices of kings, doctors, priests, and poets spoke for the first time in over 2,000 years. The world learned about the daily lives of ancient people. They learned what they feared, what they ate, and how they prayed. They read the Epic of Gilgamesh. They read the ancient flood story. If those rebels had never set the city on fire, the soft clay tablets would have naturally crumbled into dust over the centuries. Water and time would have melted the clay back into ordinary mud. But the fire of destruction was the exact thing that made the knowledge permanent. The Library of Nineveh changed the way we understand our own past. It showed us that ancient people were not just primitive farmers or simple warriors. They were deeply curious. They wanted to categorize the universe. They wanted to pass their knowledge down to the next generation. Around the year 700 BC, at the absolute height of their terrifying power, the Assyrian Empire realized that swords will eventually rust and walls will eventually fall. But knowledge, if you protect it carefully enough, can survive the end of the world.